Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Mick Leach. Mick, thanks for being here.
Thanks. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. We've been chatting offline quite a bit, but for folks that don't know you, haven't followed you, don't know your background as well as Abnormal, can you tell us a bit about yourself and the company too?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. So I'm Mick Leach. I'm the field CISO here at Abnormal Security. I've been here about 3 years. Prior to that, I had been building and leading security operations engineering architecture teams for about the last dozen years or so. And prior to that, I've been doing IT things for quite some time. I think 27 years in IT, and the last 17 of those have been in security specifically. And prior to that, it feels like a lifetime ago, I was in the United States Army Cavalry. So Scouts Out, for anybody that knows what that means. But yeah, that's a little bit about me and my life here and my journey.
Awesome. Now, how about the Abnormal team?
Yeah, so we here at Abnormal, we're an email security solution that's using behavioral data science to solve for email security. I think, I bought and used the product for a year and a half at my last gig, which is a Fortune 500 financial services company. And that's what drew me to it, is that it had a very radically different approach to solving for this, rather than traditional signature based detection looking for known bad. Here at Abnormal, we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to really baseline the environment, understand the deviations from norm, and flag on those instead. That gives us a much higher signal to noise ratio, I think.
Yeah, which is crucial. As we know, anyone who's been doing this for some time knows that we're often drowning in noise, alerts, and cognitive overload. So that signal to
Indeed.
noise ratio is critical for sure. So given that you've been at this for some time now, I want to ask, how are cyber criminals evolving their tactics in 2025, and what makes email such an attractive target for attackers, and how are they evolving, and maybe not? What are some tried and true, tested ways that they're still working pretty well?
Yeah. So first, in terms of why, because I think it's easier to unpack it in reverse, right? Why? I think, if you think about email, every company has email. It's still the way that business is largely done, is over email. So, it's the broadest attack surface that any company has. And it hits directly at the weakest links that we have, which are our users, right? Our human beings, our employees. And, and I get frustrated in a moment. I'm going to go to a short rant. I promise it'll be short. But I hear a lot of people say that users are dumb, and that's not true, right? They're well-meaning. If you were hired as an accountant to pay bills, when you get a bill, what are you going to do? You're going to pay it, right? You might dig into things. You're going to follow the process, but they haven't been hurt the way we have been. I don't know why, what has happened to us in security in the past that makes us so distrustful, but that distrust is what makes us good at our jobs. And many people, heaven love them, they haven't been hurt the way we have. And so they might just be a little more naive in terms of what bad actors are doing. So that's the why. And we've seen that email is the simplest way of attacking folks. But in terms of how things are changing, we've seen a big uptick in AI-driven attacks. The moment that generative AI came out, or at least went mainstream with ChatGPT, we saw a huge uptick in not only the volume, but really the quality of attacks as well. Now we're seeing that pretty much every attack is as good as the best attack we'd ever seen that was manually created, right? A spear phishing attack. So that's one big thing. We've seen upticks in QR code phishing. We've seen upticks in file sharing phishing. So those are big lately. Email takeover accounts. So how hard is it to take over an email account today? If MFA is not enabled, it's trivial. Even with MFA enabled, it's pretty easy still these days, right? There's lots of ways around it, Fraud GPT and evil proxy. There's a variety of solutions that bad actors are leveraging. So the tactics have changed somewhat, and largely what we're seeing is bad actors have ditched a lot of the tried and true methods of keeping a malicious link or an attachment, because we've done a pretty good job as security professionals teaching our folks, hey, don't take candy from strangers. If you don't know who this is, don't double click on this, would you? Or don't click on it and follow the link, and don't interact with it in any way. So bad actors have seen that, and they're recognizing that, and they're changing their tactics. Now they're looking to really just start a conversation. So the the kinds of things that we're seeing today are simply emails that say, "Hey, Bill, it's Bob. Give me a call when you get a minute." Except it's not Bob, right? And so that's the real challenge that we're seeing today, these sort of social engineering based attacks.
Yeah, something you said there that resonated with me is kind of the blaming of the user, because as you said, like they're often just doing what's intuitive. And I actually had a guest on my show recently who wrote a book, just came out, called Human Centered Security. And she talks about the need for, kind of human centered design within cybersecurity. So I thought that was interesting. It's often something we overlook. And then you also talked about the role of AI and enhancing phishing and attempts and things like that. It's kind of double-edged sword, right? We can use it for behavioral anomalous, detection, things like that, but also it can be weaponized against us. Um, so definitely some insightful stuff there. I'm curious as well, like, we've seen quite a role of cryptocurrency fraud as well. I'm curious, how does the rise of cryptocurrency fraud impact both individuals and businesses? And like, what are some, warning sign organizations can watch out for?
Yeah, so cryptocurrency is in particular in terms of fraud, right? What we're seeing is fraudsters are really exploiting the decentralized nature of cryptocurrency, which is targeting our individuals and businesses with increasingly sophisticated scams, right? I mean, look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin just went over $100,000. I haven't looked today, so maybe I'm behind the times, but last I looked, I think it was 102. But either way, the value of that is shooting up, which means businesses and individuals are kind of interested in getting in on it at one point or another. And so there's lots of ways they can either be lured into investing in something that they think is going to pay out for them, or leveraging the use of cryptocurrency to pay for things, and have only to pay the wrong people, right? To pay fraudsters instead. So we see this going both directions.
Yeah, it's the anonymity of it and the decentralized nature of it, is appealing for some. But as you point out, from a criminal perspective, again, like it's that double-edged sword that is at play. Earlier, you talked about kind of file sharing phishing attacks, and you said you've seen a big increase in those. What makes these so difficult to detect, and like how can businesses try to mitigate that?
Yeah, well, the problem there is everybody uses file sharing these days, whether you're using Google Drive or you're using, Microsoft solutions. It seems like it's so easy, or you're stepping completely out of that and you're using like, box.com or whatever. Like there's lots of different ways that we have, invented to share data between each other. This is fantastic news because it means I don't have to send 150, megabyte document to somebody, or, a 2 or 3 gig video to somebody to edit, to review. It can be stored on some sort of, file sharing website. The problem is the bad actors know that. And so we're seeing just between June of 23 and June of 24, we saw a 350% increase here at Abnormal. That's what we've seen across our customer base, of these kinds of attacks that are sending these fraudulent links that say, "Oh, you've got a document that, in SharePoint or wherever, for you to click on and view." And you're kind of expecting, we've grown numb to these things. Oh yeah, no, I get these all the time. And so you click on that link. And of course, what happens when you click on that link? Well, it's going to require you to log in. Well, we're numb to that too. So that's something we do all day, every day. And so you click on that link, you think you're going to a spreadsheet, you get that Microsoft looking login, and you enter your corporate credentials. And the best of the solutions will then forward you on behind the scenes, so you don't even know that something happened. Or if they're not that far advanced, they're scraping your credentials as you try to log in, and then it fails for you, and you think, let me just try another way, and you still log in, but your credentials are now gone. They're in the ether.
Yeah, you talked about, kind of file sharing. You've talked about, the kind of sprawl of SaaS, third-party software applications that we're using for all kind of purposes, and not just email, right? There's,
Mm-hmm.
collaboration, communication, video chat, asynchronous communication, all these kind of different tools that we're using. Like, how does the multi-channel phishing kind of scenario expand the attack surface? And, how are organizations typically ill-prepared, when it comes to moving beyond email of addressing phishing?
Sure. Yeah. Multi-channel attacks are really on the rise as well. We're starting to see these quite a bit. And I think this stems from the good training that we've been doing for years as security professionals. We've taught our folks for many years, decades now, to be very wary around email. The problem is we haven't necessarily asked them to bring that same level of rigor to things like, email like solutions like, Teams and Zoom, Slack, for example, right? These chat programs. And what we're seeing is that bad actors, once they compromise an account, many times they actually don't leverage email to hit up folks internally. They'll actually transition into a chat program like Teams or Slack, and hit folks up that way. And then because we just aren't expecting that. I talk to Jim every day. This has got to be Jim. It's coming in via my Slack or my Teams. I'm used to this, except today it's not him. Right. So that's one problem. The other aspect is for us to do business. Many of us have opened up and brought in external companies into our Teams or our Slack, and definitely through Zoom. And so we have threat actors that can identify these things are open and take advantage of that, or possibly compromise one of your trusted business partners and then still hit you up that way as well. So, whether it's Teams or Slack or Zoom, we're seeing multi-channel and even SMS to some extent as well. And certainly we here at Abnormal, as you might expect, the email defenses are pretty strong. And so we've seen some enterprising threat actors actually migrate to like SMS instead. So because they knew they can't get in any other way. So these are the kinds of things we're starting to really see.
Yeah, so fascinating. It's almost like the training has become effective with regard to email, but as you put it, we have a false sense of security when it comes to internal chat or something like that. Like, it just seems more secure. Like this obviously is definitely them. We chat all the time, like you said. Nothing crazy here. And then you kind of brought up, the business partners, the external SaaS providers. It has almost like a software supply chain effect to it as well, too. Yeah, scary stuff.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned, Gen AI and LLMs and like the role that they're playing in business email compromise and, more sophisticated attacks. Like, how are those AI-driven campaigns, kind of reshaping the threat landscape? Is it, making more compelling, phishing messages, addressing, maybe language barriers? Like, what exactly is going on there to make that such a factor?
Yeah, all of the above, right? I mean, as I mentioned early on, right, everything is as good as we've ever seen now in terms of the kinds of attacks that we see. The things that we used to ask our folks to be on the watch for, right, clunky grammar, misspellings, right, these kinds of things, they're gone. They're largely gone these days, thanks to generative AI in most part, right? It started with Grammarly. We started to see things get better then, but the language would still be clunky to some extent. But now with generative AI, right? Someone that couldn't craft a coherent English sentence yesterday can now write better than my 10th grade English teacher, Mrs. Fox. And that's saying something because she was pretty sharp. And if you're listening out there, Mrs. Fox, good to see you again. I'll turn it in on Friday, I promise.
So we've talked a lot about kind of the state of the attacks and things like that, but and ways to mitigate these risks. But like, say something does happen, right? Like, what are some real world consequences of email account takeover? How is it impacting organizations? Financially, reputationally, among business partners, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a variety of ways, actually. I mean, the most obvious is financial, right? We've seen, even just like Google and Microsoft spent last year, paid $122 million in fraudulent invoices. I mean, this is public data. This isn't any news per se, but it shows you that even the biggest and the best have this problem, because the bad actors are sending such compelling, such good-looking fraudulent invoices and targeting our supply chain. So they might come from either our actual vendors, maybe they've compromised them, or they can stand up lookalike domains and those kinds of things and send in fraudulent invoices. So financial is huge. That's certainly the biggest reason. BEC, or business email compromise, according to the FBI's IC3 report, released April of this year, I think it was, showed that we've lost nearly $3 billion, $2.95 billion last year lost to BEC by itself. And that's only one flavor of this attack. right? There's vendor email compromise. There's a variety of other kinds of things, pig butchering that we call going for the whole hog, financial schemes. So there's all kinds of different ways that bad actors are doing this. And so it's become really, really effective. So the financial is obvious. The other things that are maybe a little less obvious, right? If you are compromised as a vendor, which is certainly something we have to be careful of here at Abnormal and why we take it so seriously, is that if any of our customers would then be attacked by someone pretending to be us, because I've seen that before at a different company, that reputationally is going to hurt you in a big way. There's certainly operational risks. Email is such a critical business application that if that would ever go down, or if we feel like we're ever forced to take it down to protect us from an attack or from, perhaps a compromise, the business impact to the loss of email, even for a short time, is going to be pretty significant. I mean, I hear folks, IT folks tell me all the time, listen, if you want a resume generating event, just take down email for about 10 minutes on like a Monday morning, and you're going to get all of the attention you could ever want and more.
Yeah, you raised some fascinating points, which is, if that happens to a security company or security vendors, it's even more nefarious in terms of damaging the trust and the reputation, because you're kind of looked at, to be a steward of trust and security in the ecosystem. So something to keep in mind, even with security companies, even with yours, with this focus that you mentioned there. And then, email is so pervasive. We all log in, and Monday morning we're catching up on our inbox, catching up on things we missed. You take that down, the business is going to be blind, even with alternative communication channels, just because it's so ubiquitous and we still use it for so much. And so we've also talked about, the role of AI around in terms of making more compelling phishing attacks, things like that, making business email compromise more effective. What about on the defensive side? How are we using AI to, be better defended against threats? And why is it becoming a game changer when we think about, the other side of the coin of using it for security rather than being used against us?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be the hinge pin of the whole thing, if you will, right? As bad actors are starting to leverage AI to attack us, I think this is where we as defenders need to find new and innovative ways of leveraging AI to defend. So, in other words, the use of good AI to defeat the bad AI, if you will. So, I think this is going to be huge going forward. And the reality is, it's not necessarily new or groundbreaking. If you think back over time, we've been doing, leveraging machine learning in terms of identifying anomalous activity in network detection and response for a long time, NDR, and that was easy because the logging for it was so rigid. We knew exactly what value was going to be in each field, and every vendor had to adhere to this standard. And so for years, identifying beaconing activity and stuff like that in network logs was pretty easy. But it wasn't really until, compute got cheaper and storage got cheaper and machine learning sort of grew up, if you will, matured, that we were able to really pour in unstructured log data and start to analyze that and identify, what a baseline looked like for your organization. If you want to go back maybe 10 years, this looked like EDR. And I remember the moment we went from like traditional virus scans to an antivirus to like an EDR. And I remember the first time I saw CrowdStrike demoed to me, and they said, Mick, what if we didn't care what evil looked like? We only cared how it behaves. And I was like, well, no, but how you got to find it. And they said, no, but if it doesn't do anything, is it really dangerous? And I was like, gosh, I guess not. And so that was a big change from the way we had been doing things for the decade before. And so suddenly we were now looking more around, and again, using machine learning, but we were looking at how malware was behaving, because there's very specific tales, of how malware behaves that we were easily able to identify. And so EDR really changed the game in that way. But again, that's leveraging log data that's all pretty well defined, and all the applications, the operating systems in particular, leverage a lot of the same kinds of solutions. They don't change the logging very often. But then as we matured, in the last 5 years, we've been able to really start doing this same thing with really unstructured logs, pouring like email log data in, SaaS application log data in, and really starting to say, okay, this is what normal looks like. And from that, we're able to identify the deviations from norm. And I think that is going to be the biggest difference maker going forward. And that's what machine learning AI is purpose built for, right? Consuming just metric tons of information and then identifying the thread of truth that runs through it all.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is the unstructured nature of it. It's one thing when you're looking at certain logs or schemas and things like that, but you're talking about natural language, just communications, which, as you pointed out earlier, due to AI, are very compelling in nature and seem human-like, right? So it's very difficult to do that without leveraging this technology to kind of fight against attacks coming from it. So it's pretty scary stuff, but it's also promising the potential we can use it to mitigate these threats too. You talked about traditional security measures around email security, like training and awareness and phishing and things like that. Phishing training, for example. And there's also traditional technical measures like secure email gateways, for example. Why are those becoming less effective when we look at modern sophisticated attacks?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of like secure email gateways, and let's again unpack it kind of in reverse. So secure email gateways are awesome. Like, I want to be clear there. They're great. They do a really good job of identifying like known bad, and almost all of us use one, whether even if it's just your Microsoft or Google native capabilities. Maybe you've gone out and bought something like a Symantec or a Proofpoint or a Mimecast. Awesome. Again, great solutions that are doing good work. I think where they start to fall down is in terms of like social engineering attacks. And again, these guys are largely created with signature-based detection that we touched on earlier. So it's tried to define what evil looks like and then look for that definition, whether it's a hash value or an IP address or like a sending domain. These are the key things we've been looking for years to say this is bad, and we will block that. But what happens with novel attacks, right? We used to not see 0 days very often, and now it feels like every day has a 0 day. And so it is because it's so trivial to change any one of those aspects, right? You want a new IP address? No problem. Fire up a VPN. I can be from anywhere I want in seconds. New hash value on a malicious file? Just recompile the code. Right? I add a space anywhere in the file, recompile the code. I get a brand new hash value that's never been seen before. Same thing with sending domains, right? With fast fluxing, we can spin up new domains ad nauseum. Thanks AWS and many of the cloud providers. They've made it so easy to fire up new domains that you can be from anywhere, again, in moments. And so it really tears down all of the work that we put into threat intelligence. So if we've never seen it before, then that doesn't work for us. So that's probably the biggest reason. I think there are a couple other reasons why secure email gateways have a hard time, right? So they, by their very nature, they sit on the perimeter and they evaluate the email that comes and passes through it, which is great. The problem is about 70%, 80% at most companies, their email is internal to internal, right? So a traditional SEG is blind to all of that internal to internal traffic, and not only that, it takes a long time for enough data to pass through that gateway to then really train and understand what bad looks like. So time to value takes a long time, 3 to 6 months typically. I've deployed a few of these over the years. So time to value is long. And the amount of, the percentage of data that it can evaluate is, less than half at pretty much any company. And so when you start to, if you try imagine selling this to someone, my boss, for example, hey boss, I want to buy this new solution. It'll cover about 20 to 30% of the threat, environment. And it's going to cost a fair bit of money. And oh, by the way, for the first 3 to 6 months, we won't really be eking the value out of it that we will down the road. boy, that's a hard sell. That's with newer solutions, that are API driven. You'll defeat most of those things, right? Because with an API, I can see everything, north, south, and east, west. And the time to value, because we could do a look back in time, is trivial, right? I mean, now I'm training in minutes and hours rather than weeks or months.
Yeah, I think that's a key point when we look at, people are kind of overwhelmed with security tools, and they're often looking for, quick time to value, proof of value of why this is a good investment, a good area to spend on, and, kind of rally the team around. You made a great point there. And again, you talked about the ease of spinning up new domains and things like that. Again, it comes back to that ease and, the dynamic nature of the technology and how we can use it. But again, so can malicious actors use it for their own purposes as well. So sticking with the AI topic a little bit more, you talked about these AI native solutions. Like, how do organizations get started when they want to try to use some of these to detect, mitigate, and prevent, some of these advanced threats? Where do they get started? How do they get started?
Yeah, so that's probably the best thing of all, right? Is these new API-driven solutions, the integration is absolutely trivial. I mean, it takes just moments, because now you're talking really about credentialing. So if you can install, in the case of like Microsoft 365, you just add it as an enterprise application within your Microsoft 365 tenant. Same thing goes for G Suite, and so it's the integration is so fast and so easy. In fact, when I bought Abnormal and used it for the very first time at a previous company before I joined Abnormal, I didn't believe them. I mean, I just didn't believe that there's no way it could be this easy. I was at a Fortune 500 bank, and we couldn't do anything in a month, let alone a minute. So when they said it could be integrated in a minute, I just didn't believe it. And so I called in one of our folks and said, listen, they say they can hook this up in a minute. I don't believe them. Let's see if it actually does it. So I called him out on the spot. And you know what? Because you're just, deploying a new enterprise application in the tenant, it really is. It's like 3 clicks in 30 seconds. And you don't have to change your MX records. You don't have to change the mail flow routing for anything. All of that stays exactly the same as it's set up today. So it really is so trivial to set it all up and start seeing what's going on. From there, it takes time to value is like 7 days. Because again, you can do that look back. And so I can force feed like 30, 60, even 90 days worth of data into the models. And now you're training in just a short period of time. So time to value, at least in my case, and most of the folks that I've spoken with, is, 7 days. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's pretty incredible compared to, you kind of get it up, you gotta get it configured, tuned, optimized, establish baselines, you gotta dedicate, headcount to getting it truly working and functioning. We know the stories when it comes to a lot of security tools. So I'm sure it's a very compelling narrative and sell to the customer. So that's awesome to hear. So we've covered a lot of ground here, traditional attacks, evolving attacks, the role of AI, both technical and policy process, human center type stuff. What are some key takeaways for organizations looking to enhance their email security defenses? Given all these topics.
Yeah. So I think the key takeaways are number one, that the threat actors are changing, right? The ways that they're attacking us are changing. They realize that a lot of the defenses that we've deployed over the years are effective. And so they're changing their strategies, their techniques and tactics and procedures to get around those kinds of things. So we're seeing much more in terms of social engineering, which is really hard to detect, right? For us to detect, a social engineering attack, we have to have so much data to understand who the sender is, who the recipient is. Have they spoken before? Is this usually where they log in? Is this where the domains are? And there's just so many little details that you have to look at to really sense, is this legitimate or is it not? So, we're definitely seeing the attackers change their mindset. The volume of attacks is increasing like exponentially. There's a lot of phishing as a service solutions out there for your criminal dollar, all vying for that criminal dollar. So they're offering new capabilities every day. So even if you're not a mature technical threat actor, and there are many, like organized crime has seen the value of this. They see how much it can be taken. So they're investing in things like phishing as a service. So now, without any technical understanding, any infrastructure stood up at all to support you, you can build out an entire phishing program and send, tens of thousands of messages in moments. It's pretty terrifying when you think about it. And that volume is starting to kind of swamp some of our security tooling. And so we need solutions that are leveraging AI to sift through all of that data to identify the anomalous activity. And that, again, is where I think the biggest bang for the buck is going to be going forward, getting away from signature-based detection. I'm not saying that there's no value in it. I think there's always going to be value in defending against known bad, but we've got to do better against unknown bad, right? And I think that's where behavioral-based detection, right? That's going to be the key thing going forward.
Yeah, well said. I think it's it's not that it's the old defense in depth concept. It's not that signatures are inherently bad. It's just that it's a lagging indicator of risk. Where we're starting to look at behavioral based type stuff is more of a leading indicator of getting ahead of the threat. So well said, well said. We covered a lot of ground, Mick. So thanks so much for jumping on here and chatting with me, and thanks to the Abnormal team for letting you come hang out. And thanks to everyone who tuned in as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, folks. I appreciate being on, and wish everybody a wonderful holiday season.
Absolutely. Take care.